Hey, this is going to be a bit of a weird and theoretical video, but I just wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about lately, which is why does anything exist? So, this is a pretty general question about the universe. So, if we were to think about why our universe exists, well, you might say because something created it. Maybe it was the Big Bang, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a god or something else. But then you could ask the question, well, what created that? And you could continue to ask the question, what created that? What created that? And so you don't really quite necessarily get an answer unless you sort of assume some absolute truth, like the universe exists because it does, or the universe exists because there's a God who created it and that's all there is. And that's fine, I guess, but I think it still doesn't quite answer the question, how do we know something else didn't create that absolute truth? Like, why should it be the case that any single thing exists? So, I just want to ponder that a bit in this video. So, we could think about what do we know, well, philosophically. Well, we know two things mainly. We know that we ourselves are conscious. Well, we perceive ourselves to be conscious. We sort of think we're conscious. And for all intents and purposes, that's a pretty fine assumption. We also know that we perceive things. So we feel like we're interacting with the universe. We perceive a universe in front of us. So we sort of know we perceive things. But that's sort of the extent of what we can know for certain. So there's certain things that we actually can't necessarily know. And this is kind of an interesting topic, but for example, we can't know for certain that the world didn't start 1 second ago. Like maybe we could think, well, 5 seconds ago I was sitting at my desk. The universe couldn't have started it 1 second ago. But there's really nothing there to say that you're not just imagining that you're at your desk 5 seconds ago and the universe really did start 1 second ago. So it's kind of a weird thing. We can't really know. Something else we can't know is whether we were conscious 1 second ago. I mean, maybe we thought we were conscious, but maybe that's also just an illusion. Something else we can't know if other people are conscious. So we sort of assume that we ourselves are conscious because, well, we perceive things from our own perspective, but we don't necessarily know that other people are just like us, perceiving things from their own perspectives. For all we know, we're the only conscious being in the universe, and everything else just appears conscious. But we can't really answer that question because we can't test if someone else is conscious because we can never become them. We can never peer into their mind and determine if they're conscious or not. Something else we can't really know is if consciousness and physical existence are two separate things. I mean, maybe they're the same thing, so maybe our brain behaves according to the laws of the universe, and somehow those laws come together and create consciousness. Or maybe our consciousness exists on a completely separate dimension from reality, and we just sort of experience things from the perspective of a physical body. But again, we can't really answer that question with what we know. So this doesn't really get us anywhere towards answering the question of why does anything exist? Heck, we don't even know why do we exist. So I'm going to take a bit of a detour and make a bit of an assumption. So we're going to try to maybe just rethink consciousness a bit. So with just basic philosophical principles, we can't really get too far. But let's think about artificial intelligence. So this sort of raises the question, can a computer program be conscious? And I mean, that's a reasonable question. Maybe you could program a computer program that is self-conscious and sees things from its own perspective and interacts with the world just as we do. But even if we were to create such a computer program, it would, again, as it would be impossible to know for sure if that computer program is actually conscious, in the same vein that we can't know if other people are actually conscious. But just for a second, let's assume that, okay, other people are conscious, but let's also assume that, well, computer programs could be conscious. Now, this is a bit of an assumption, and this assumption is going to make up the core of this video. But with just this assumption, I think we can discover something pretty interesting, or at least go on a fun thought train ride. So let's think about what AI is, or in other words, what is a computer program? Well, in simple terms, a computer program is just data. So in your computer, you have a bunch of bits. They're either 1 or 0, and your computer constantly looks at those bits and it changes them based on what the bits say, and it constantly changes those bits, and you sort of get running programs in your computer. So the conscious computer program that we're sort of hypothesizing will have to live within this data, have to live within this sort of sandbox. It's pretty much, it lives within the bits, and it's that those bits comprise its entire universe. Now, something important to note is that such a computer program couldn't actually interact with our reality. It couldn't interact with a reality external to its own universe, which is the data. So I have sort of an illustration to illustrate that. Here we have the computer program in its own universe, and here we have ourselves in our own universe, and we can't really interact because we exist in two separate realities per se. There's the virtual reality that the computer program lives in, and there's the real reality, well, what we perceive as the real reality, which we live in. Well, almost. So this is almost correct, but you could have an interface between the two worlds, which is anything like keyboard controls, like maybe a way that you could push a button to do something in the computer program's world. So here I have this cute little picture. So you push a button to spawn a cake inside the virtual world, and our little AI friend really likes that. But you could also imagine, like, you could have speakers in the computer, and the speakers in the computer allow the computer program to actually talk to us. And that's also an interface. So you could have interfaces going both ways, so that we can interact with the AI's world and the AI can sort of interact with our world. So, okay, that's possible. But let's get back to the data. So, all in all, this computer program, the entire thing, it's entirely comprised of just data living on the computer and the computer's memory. Well, this is actually kind of interesting because we don't actually need a computer to run a computer program. All the data that is stored within your computer memory is just ones and zeros. You could very well just write that on a sheet of paper. If you had a lot of time and a lot of paper, you could do that. So let's imagine that instead of running our conscious computer program on the computer, we instead write it down on paper and execute it by hand. I mean, ultimately, the results are still going to be the same if we follow the correct rules and everything that the computer follows. We should be able to essentially run our conscious program on paper. In a sense, it's sort of like writing a book, where each page of the book is a frame in the life of the conscious program, and we're constantly writing new pages as we execute the program, as we run the program, to build upon the book. And this book sort of comprises the artificial intelligence's entire life story in a way. But it's a work in progress book. It's not ending because we're constantly executing it. We're adding new pages to it. So there's something weird here. So is it still conscious? I mean, if we take this data and we put it in the book, like we're literally writing a book with our hands. Like, you could do it with a pencil if you had enough time. Is that still conscious? Well, I mean, given our initial assumptions, there's really no reason why it wouldn't be conscious. I mean, we assumed a computer program could be conscious to begin with. So it shouldn't really matter if we execute that computer program on a computer or if we execute it by hand or however else we decide to execute it. If we assume it's conscious, if we assume computer programs can be conscious, then it shouldn't matter. So this kind of raises an interesting question. So we have this conscious computer program living within a book. You might wonder, wait, well, if it's like it's in a book, what does it see? Well, pretty much it sees the exact same thing as it saw before. In a sense, its virtual universe hasn't really changed at all. It's still the same ones and zeros that it was when it was running on the computer, but now we just put it in book form. So, but the AI itself doesn't really know it's in a book. It doesn't really care if it's in a book or if it's on a computer, if it's in computer RAM. It doesn't make a difference to the AI because all it knows is its data that it lives within, so it's virtual reality. That's all that matters to the computer program. But you might also think, well, wait, running a computer program by hand, that's going to take a really long time. So wouldn't the AI also maybe perceive a difference in time if it's run on the computer versus if it's run by hand? Well, not really, because everything that it experiences is exactly the same before. All the data is exactly the same as before. The entire reality that the computer program lives within is exactly the same as before, because it doesn't experience time in our reality. It experiences time in its reality. All right, so we can sort of maybe come to the conclusion that the data in the book is conscious. I mean, I might lose some people here, but I would definitely say if you don't believe this, then maybe think about it for a bit. But I'm going to assume that I've made a decent argument here. So, all right, let's get more complicated. So, what if we just never wrote the data down? What if instead of writing the data into a book, instead of that, what if we just spoke the data? What if we calculated the data by hand with a calculator, said the data, but never wrote it down? But we have a really good memory, so we're just sort of able to continue speaking the program. I mean, that shouldn't make a difference, right? We're still running the program the same as before. It's the same program, it's just on a different medium. And if you explore this, it's kind of interesting. So, okay, well, what if we run the program in our dreams? So, what if we go to sleep at night and then in our dreams we speak the program? Well, again, if we're executing the program as it would have been executed on the computer, then nothing should really change. It should still be conscious. And this is really interesting, because if you think about it, your dream, that's hardly even reality. It's something that happens within your mind. So we're sort of getting really abstract here. So, okay, what if we just never wrote the program down? What if we never ran the program? Well, we know one thing. If we never run the program, well, of course, we'll never see the data. The data will never be fully computed within our reality. But such a program has the potential to exist. And if you think about it, if we start with a definition of the program, then the way it runs, so if we start with the initial state of the program and we have all of our rules that we need to follow to run the program, then the way the program runs is predetermined. So in a way, even though we haven't written down the program, it's already somehow determined. It's already deterministic. It already exists in a very abstract sense. So what does it matter if the program is physically run or not? Why couldn't it just exist within logic? So this is sort of my illustration of this. So he sort of exists within his own bubble of logic where no one's actually running the program. In our reality, no one's running the program. It's possible for this program to exist. So within logic, by induction or whatever, this program just exists. And from the perspective of the data within the program, it thinks it's conscious and it perceives its own universe, even though no one's running its universe. It's sort of existing in its own imaginary bubble. So, this is kind of interesting. Well, there are some things that we can sort of take home from this. I mean, one thing that's really interesting is if you think about it, logic and mathematics, they don't need a physical reality to exist if you think about it. If you could think about any expression that holds true in mathematics or any logical equation, you could sort of imagine that same expression or logical equation holding true even if nothing existed, even if we didn't exist, even if the universe didn't exist. You could imagine these abstract concepts as still somehow being absolute truths. Of course, you could take this or leave it, but it's something to think about. So, even if nothing existed, then it's sort of easy to imagine that, well, maybe mathematical and logical truths are still true for all of eternity, or I guess there's no eternity if nothing exists, but for even in the case where nothing exists. So, yeah, 2 plus 2 equals 4, that should still equal 4 even if humans never existed, even if our universe never existed. 2 plus 2, in the way that it is defined logically, should still hold true. So, okay, well, we encountered another logical statement earlier, saying that such a program is possible. Well, that's also sort of a logical statement because that's sort of saying that, okay, well, you could possibly define the program state in such a way that it's able to exist. You could write down the program state and you could write down the rules that run the program state. Therefore, such a program is possible. So even if nothing existed, such a program should still be possible. So what this sort of says is that even if nothing existed, the mere fact that logical truths can exist, or not can exist, but logical truths hold true even without existence, and what we thought about earlier, that even if no one runs the program, the data within the program is still conscious of itself, of its existence, then that sort of leads us to the conclusion that consciousness can arise from nothing. And this is sort of interesting to think about it, because not only can consciousness arise from nothing, but it's almost as though a universe could arise from nothing. So if you think about the conscious program from earlier, it sort of lived within its own reality. It's sort of ones and zeros reality. I mean, maybe this could be like some sort of a physical simulation, and the AI could be looking at maybe pretty mountains and rivers and stuff, and it could actually be seeing these as maybe we would see them. But it's still living within this sort of reality constructed out of data. But it is to that computer program that is its reality, that is its universe. So yeah, it's pretty much what it perceives as its own universe, just as we perceive our universe. And if you think about it, our universe also sort of behaves like a program in some sense, because it's sort of, well, our universe has a current state that it's currently in, and we've discovered all these physical laws and rules that it sort of seems to follow as time evolves. So maybe our universe is somehow just a very, very large computer program. Not a computer program, but just a very large program that could be defined in terms of abstract logic if you had maybe infinite computing power, for example. So that's to say that perhaps our universe and us inside it exists simply because such a universe is possible, and we are here to witness it. So yeah, that got kind of deep, but this is just something I've been thinking about for a while, and I just think it's really interesting to sort of consider how, if we just assume that a computer program could potentially be conscious, it sort of almost entails a lot. Of course, if you consider this to be a sound argument, but you might have your differing opinions. But yeah, this is something I thought was interesting, and this is the conclusion I've reached. So yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for watching, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Yep. So I'll see you then. Peace.